in lieu of time, because if those who are joining us today did not read the description fully, this training should take about an hour and a half, hopefully not 2 hours. I'll try to get through everything just to be mindful of time. But of course, if you're not able to stay for the entire time, you can always go to Teams and go to the activity section for these trainings. And of course, feel free to go to them and see what else others have done. If you haven't been able to attend all of these trainings, which have been very fantastic and such a great use of our time during our COVID time. Okay, so before we really get started and going into it, I'll just give a little background on myself. So I'm Melissa O'Connor. I'm a licensed mental health counselor here in New York State. I've been doing work with children and victims of domestic violence and sexual assault for about 13 years now. So before coming to family services, I was in Danbury. I was a child therapist at a crisis center there. And then I decided to switch and come to Poughkeepsie because this is where I live and I want to be more connected with my community. In addition to being a therapist, I'm also a forensic interviewer in Connecticut. So what that means is that I help with investigations of child abuse, neglect, and also will interview children who may have witnessed crimes for the local multidisciplinary team in the Danbury, Fairfield area primarily. So I just want to give some of that background. There we go. So also, I like to give the disclaimer because we're going to be talking about children being victims of sexual abuse, which I don't begin to pretend like there is no one else on this call who may have experienced these things in their lives, or have people that have in their lives that have been impacted by child sexual abuse, especially in the work that we're doing with family services. So please take time to take care of yourselves. I say this even when we're in person, but this might be a little easier. So if you need to take a moment to step away from the computer, to turn mute off, doodle, do whatever you have to do to take care of yourself today. And if you are someone who is in the community, utilizing our hotlines, if you have a therapist already with our services, because again, these trainings are open to the community, reaching out to that person. Or at the end, I'll also have my email if any one of the colleague or someone wants to reach out just to touch base. So our learning objectives for today, we're going to understand what the definition of child abuse is. We're going to look at what the definition of incest is and other forms of sexual abuse. Understanding offenders, problematic behaviors, the grooming process, understanding disclosures, the reasoning why a child will tell or not tell about being abused and how they tell if they do. Understanding red flags of child sexual abuse and overall how we can help children. So the definition of child sexual abuse, this is a beautiful combination of different definitions, but I think it gets to the point very well. So child sexual abuse constitutes a broad range of unwanted behaviors and usually happens over an extended period of time. Child abuse is possible because of the differences in power and control between the offender and the victim. So what is consent? What is statutory rape? What are those things and why is this important to know? So in the state of New York, the age of consent is 17. And I think it's important to know that even though someone is the age of consent, that does not necessarily mean that they are free to have sexual relations with whoever. It just means at the age of 17, that person is now able to engage in sexual activity. So that intends the law. So there's, in different states, there's different laws that range from different ages, from like 14 to 18, but that doesn't necessarily mean that if someone's 14 that they could be engaging in sexual relations with someone who say like is in their 30s or 40s. It just means that, again, that person is able to then engage in sexual relations. And it's good to understand the differences between rape and statutory rape. So statutory rape is defined as sexual contact with an individual who is below the legal age of consent. This law usually refers to adults engaged in sexual activity with minors. There are many different terms, all of which are referred to statutory rape, sexual assault, rape of a child, corruption of a minor, and many others. So going through this, it's very important to know that New York State statutory laws is violated when a person has consensual sexual intercourse with an individual under the age of 17 who they are not married to. I highlight this part because child marriage is very much legal in the United States of America. The laws vary depending on states. I think this may be incorrect, but I think Delaware might be one of the first states where they actually have made it illegal to marry minors. But it's very much something that is a reality, and I don't necessarily have sides on that, but it's something if you're interested in looking into. It's very eye-opening, so I think it's very important to understand that distinction. So someone can be married, an adult can be married to a child, a minor, and then therefore statutory rape is not illegal because they are married. So yeah, punishment varies depending on the age of the offender. There is no defense based around lack of knowledge of the victim's age. So someone cannot claim, oh, they were in the bar, or they were at a club, or they were somewhere where they would have to be a certain age. The person who is initiating all that need to make sure that who you're engaging in sexual behavior with or interactions with, you need to understand if the child or the minor is, or the person is of age. And New York does not have a close in age exception. Close in age exception, commonly known as the Romeo and Juliet laws. So basically, when it comes to that, if someone is 17 versus 15 or 16, there's no exception to that law. In other states, maybe it could be like a 2-year difference, and that would be okay. So understanding rape and statutory rape. Forcible rape is a crime where someone is forced to have sex when the person doesn't want to. Usually it's called rape. Statutory is consensual between two people, meaning that both people agree to have sex, and there's no force or violence or coercion. However, it is illegal to do due to the age of consent. And both are illegal, which I think goes without saying. So I'm not going to necessarily go through all of these laws and regulations. So if you want to review them while I'm speaking, feel free. And understanding that you can also go to New York statutes, can look these up and see the differences between the different felonies and the degrees and all of those things when it regards to incest. But overall, it's sexual contact between family members. And again, laws vary state to state regarding what constitutes that crime, but essentially it is someone who is guilty of this crime commits either sexual assault or rape, depends on the act against someone who is within a family member. So this could be a brother, a sister, half-blood relative, uncle, aunt, nephew, niece, someone who is within the family bloodline is considered to be the incest. And regardless, unwanted sexual contact from a family member can have lasting effects on the survivor, regardless if it is assumed to be consensual or not, which we'll get into that. But just understanding that even at the magnitude and the scale of things, there is always lasting effects on the survivor. So what are some examples of child sexual abuse? So it's important to understand that child sexual abuse does not have to include physical contact between the perpetrator and a child. And also, so for everyone knows, during this training, I might switch between offender, perpetrator, abuser, all essentially meaning the same thing. So again, it does not need to include physical contact between a perpetrator and the child. So forms of child sexual abuse could be exposing yourself to a minor, so showing your genitalia to the child, or things like that, or exposing the child to pornography or other inappropriate sexual content. An example of this is that I had a coworker who was not abused, but their Boy Scout leader would have the scouts, the troops over, and would leave pornographic images and magazines around their home, but seemingly inconspicuous, like, oh, I didn't realize I still had this on the coffee table, and then kind of engaging in the kids with that conversation. So that can be something. If someone is masturbating in front of the presence of a minor or forcing the minor to masturbate. So oftentimes perpetrators will maybe say something to police, or someone else being like, well, I was just trying to teach them how to do this, when in fact, no one needs to be taught how to masturbate. It's something people figure out on their own. They don't need an adult to help them with that. So also producing, owning, or sharing pornographic images or movies of children. So some people may say that this is child pornography. Maybe the terminology would also like to use is pornographic or abuse images, sexual abuse images of children, or videos, sexual abuse videos of children, kind of to desensitize that child pornography, because essentially it is abuse images. Obscene phone calls, text messages, or digital interactions. This one is huge in today's day and age. For example, there's been interactions with perpetrators who find their victims through the game Fortnite, where you're connecting through people through the game, and maybe you're having that chat, because in that video gaming thing, which I'm not a video game person, but knowing that you can interact with people that you don't know when you're playing these games. So that has been a huge issue, and luring victims in through these games and getting to know them, and then further perpetrating, may that be with sharing images or asking for images or whatever else may be happening. So then also those obscene phone calls and things like that could just be sexual contact, sexual talk, inappropriate conversations. And to further that along, we get to the physical touching of sexual contact or fondling. So that could be fondling different areas of the body, the genitalia. And then that could also lead to sex of any kind with a minor. That could be vaginal, oral, or anal. And then on the scheme of things, which would get briefly into domestic minor sex trafficking, that is also considered to be child sexual abuse. And also understanding that any sexual contact that is harmful to any sexual contact is harmful to a child's mental, emotional, and physical welfare. So getting into the profile, or understanding those who may have problematic sexual behavior or sexual offenders, all those different terminology. So it's important to understand that child sex offenders try very hard to manipulate not only the children they victimize, but also the communities they are a part of. They go to a lot of effort to present a persona to the general community that is highly charming, likable, and trustworthy. And this increases the likelihood they will gain access to working with kids one-on-one basis, because they are deemed morally worthy by the community. So this, again, could be, unfortunately, a priest or a pastor. This could be a doctor. It could be a health worker of some sort. It could be a therapist. It could be a teacher, or it could be a coach. It could be the next door neighbor. It could be any of these type of things that we see. Like, for example, if everyone knows of the gymnastics team, how the doctor went years with perpetrating the different team members on the gymnastics team, where he was sexually abusing the different members of the team, and doing so even in front of the parents of the team members. So it's not even as if this was always happening when he was alone with the children, but it was also happening in front of the parents. So understanding the manipulation that went behind that, and the trust that the parents and the children had in this person, and how this kind of veil went over their eyes when it came to certain things or certain interactions. Because hey, here's a doctor, this is, doctors are supposed to examine children, but using that authority to then use to perpetrate children. Again, so differences in terminology. There could be pedophile, sex offender, predator, perpetrator. There's so many different terminologies. Some kind of intersect with each other or can be flip-flop for each other. And also understanding that perpetrators can be children or adults, oftentimes or in the media or just through general learning. A lot of people focus on maybe that like creepy person who's like luring in the bushes, or that weird neighbor, the weird uncle or whatever, or that, that crazy cat lady next door, whatever it may be, who's an adult, when in fact this can be happening by children as well. And perpetrators who victimize children or victimize girls have an average of 12 victims. And if they abuse boys as well, this number doubles. So important to keep that in mind. And it's also important to keep in mind that someone who is a sex offender, they may have a certain preference on who they're abusing, but they may not as well. When it comes to abuse, they just abuse everyone. There's no separation. And then 70% of perpetrators have abused victims of different age ranges. So most of the time people will think that someone who is a child sex abuser, they're thinking, okay, this person is a pedophile, they have a sexual preference to children of a certain age, when in fact research shows that 70% of perpetrators are not just perpetrating one age range, they're perpetrating children, teens, and adults all in the same. So how some people become offenders, of course, this isn't like the end all be all, but it's important to acknowledge that early exposure to pornography, sexual behaviors, and sexual abuse can lead to someone becoming an offender. But I think it's also very important to note that research shows that only 30% of perpetrators were sexually abused as children. So oftentimes, abusers, if they do get caught, they might say something that like they were also sexually abused, to kind of, in a way, wave some favor in there, or some compassion in their way, being like, okay, well, this happened to me and this is why I did it. So that's not always the case. So understanding that only 30% of perpetrators who are sexually abused as children go on to start to abuse others as well. And I think that's also important to realize too, because sometimes when a child or someone we know has been sexually abused, someone might have a fear, a parent might have a fear, like, oh my goodness, what if my child goes off and does this again to someone else because they're abused. And that's why, of course, it's important to encourage therapy just to get all of that situated and talked through, but also understanding that that may not actually happen. I also highlight the early exposure to pornography is something that is happening more and more often as children are having easier access to computers, to tablets, to whatever device they have. In fact, that the kids, I used to run a girls empowerment group, and oftentimes either young middle school people are saying that there's people who are watching porn in class. They're doing it in the bathroom together, or even younger to even elementary school age children are watching pornography, and this might be done purposely because of out of curiosity. They want to go like searching for something and then they get somewhere else. Or oftentimes too, that even if there's parental controls on a child's device, sometimes there's pop-ups or links that come up in either like YouTube or children's games that if the child clicks on it, that can lead to somewhere where they shouldn't be. So it's important to monitor that. But early exposure to pornography can increase the likelihood of someone becoming an offender. Other things is being over-sexualized at a young age, stimulating or arousing sexual contact with other children or aggressive sexual activity, understanding that 76% of perpetrators started perpetrating as children. So often we're seeing, again, like maybe someone is caught or it's someone's an adult and they are caught perpetrating children or sex offending other people. But this is something they were thinking, oh, well, this only started recently, but it's more likely shown that this is something that's been going on for a very long time. Also repetition, imprinting, or hardwiring. So again, kind of that message of, you know, here's this child that maybe kids were playing doctor, which is very developmentally appropriate for some children. And then, you know, they get curious and then they kind of move on. And then there might be some other children that there is some type of stimulation or enjoyment out of the play, and the other kids might move on with their lives and that kid is fixated. So they want that repetition. So then they go to other kids in the neighborhood or the friends' siblings, or then they get older and that kid starts to hang out with the younger kids, and then so on and so forth. And this person continues to perpetrate because of whatever the interaction was. So it's kind of just like hardwired into them. Negative attention or cultural messages that we receive. There's just a lot of sex messages or sexual messages in our media. So trying to understand that, or just the messages we receive. And that could even just be even as simple as when a female teacher sexually abuses a male student, that seems to be like this rite of passage, or it seems cool that that happens, when in fact that is not cool. That is child sexual abuse. But there's these type of messages where that's like, okay, but meanwhile a male teacher sexually abusing a student is disgusting. So understanding the differences in these messages, but they're exactly the same thing. Yeah, lack of early detection and intervention. Again, those kids who might be having those problematic sexual behaviors, maybe lacking those early detections, or maybe if something is detected, maybe it's kind of pushed under the rug and that child did not receive the proper care, proper intervention or therapy that they would have needed, and they may then continue on with their problematic sexual behavior. It's also important to know that 5% of the male population suffers from pedophilia. So that is 1 in 20 men. And I think that's an astonishing stat to understand, because I think, I can't speak for everyone who is going on this journey of this training with us, but I'm going to assume that all of us know at least 20 men. So just understanding that people who have pedophilia urges or desires or whatever we would like to call it, they are around, and just being mindful of that. Fewer than 5% of sex offenders are ever apprehended. This does not account for undetected offenses prior to arrest. So I think that is also hugely important to understand, that there's something going on. Okay, why aren't we detecting this more? Why are they not being apprehended more? What are those barriers? And is it that they're just so good at what they do, that they're so good at finding other people and being undetected? Or is there other things going on where, again, maybe things are being swept under the rug, which is also why it's so important. As well, myself, I'm a mandated reporter, but if there is suspicion or someone makes a disclosure, it's so important to provide that information to the powers that be, because oftentimes some of these things are not being addressed. It's also important to understand that research shows that only 3 to 5% of sex offenders are actually being convicted. So that kind of goes along the lines of those who are convicted or arrested for rape. Only, I believe, 1 to 3% or 1 to 8% of people who are being charged with rape actually get any jail time or convicted of any jail time or sentenced, whatever that sentencing may be. And then also understanding reoffense rates and post-release from prison programs. So understanding that the numbers are skewed. So they're saying the recidivism rate of sex offenders is 3.5%. But we have to look at what these numbers actually mean. So that seems like a low number. Okay, only 3.5% of sex offenders are reoffending. Oh, that's wonderful. However, we have to look at, okay, is that, so first we have to have the offense, right? That offender then has to get caught. They then have to be convicted of the crime. They have to go do crime, they have to do prison time, or they have to be in a program thereafter. So after all that is done, they are, released, they're in the community again. That offender then has to offend again. That offender has to get caught again. That offender has to be convicted again, and the offender has to then be going to prison, going through the programs to then even meet that recidivism rate. So so in terms of people who are being released back into the community, that offender, if they're reoffending because of what they're learning and trying to be careful and not get caught again, they are they're less likely to get caught. If they're re-victimizing someone, the victim is less likely to re-report, and families are less likely to re-report. So those are very important stats to understand. So it seems like a good thing, but in actuality, when you really dive in deep, it doesn't really hold water. So how can I identify a child with sexually problematic behaviors? So it's really important to distinguish between healthy, age-appropriate sexuality and child sexual abuse. So healthy sexual activity is between equals. It's lighthearted fun, like the doctor game. You're like, okay, hoo-hoo, we just giggled. Now we're moving on with our lives. And if that is ever something that if a parent or someone walks in on something like that, understanding, okay, what's happening right now, having those conversations and following through on okay, let me assess the situation. Also understanding one does not delight in pain of others. It's curiosity, exploration, experimentation among peers. Child stops inappropriate behavior once they are asked to stop. And also masturbation can start very early and continues throughout childhood. So that can be, a healthy sexual activity, but also having those understanding, okay, if you're doing these things, you do these things in private, and kind of just having those boundaries that we're doing this alone. And again, just having that understanding. Again, not teaching them how to, but the boundaries around it. Very important to hone in on. So main assessment questions for possible abuse. Is there a difference in age, size, status, ability, or power between the two children engaging in the sexual behavior? For example, is it, a 5-year-old versus a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old, where that older child is, age-wise, they're older, size-wise, they could be larger in status. Just understanding, okay, the differences in all these things. Is it someone who is a teenager and their caretaker or babysitter or something like that, or the cool kid in the neighborhood or the cool cousin or whatever it may be, where that child who's being victimized feels overpowered or not in control of the situation, and the perpetrator is taking control and power over the situation. Because again, at the end of the day, sexual abuse is all about power and control. Okay, so age is one of the children or teens 3 or more years older than the other. Are they much larger? Status, does the child have more power? Babysitter, again, all those things, bully on the block, etc. Ability, does the child or teen have a greater mental, emotional, or physical ability? Is the possible victim disabled or developmentally delayed? Understanding those type of things. And the power, again, are there threats? Are there bribes? Are you physically being forced? Or is there some type of manipulation going on that then prevents or further allows the perpetrator to perpetrate? And children consistently miss or ignore social cues and or boundaries. So that's something that is problematic if someone who is doing perpetration maybe they're not in tune to those things and boundaries. Child minimizes, denies, or justifies the impact of the abuse on the victim. So maybe they think that the other child deserved it, or they liked it, or they were involved with it. They are playing, well, we're just playing a game, something along those lines. And also just going back to this too, and going back to if say you do walk in on something and kids, don't have their pants on or something looks suspicious, oftentimes these type of moments, it's very important to be aware of ourselves to help that situation as an adult. And if we're seeing something, we may be like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? Who is doing this? Blah, 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 getting upset and emotional and maybe raising our voices, when it's like, oh, and coming in with more curiosity, like, oh, what's going on here? Are you guys playing a game? Oh, okay. What's this game about? What are the rules of this game? Who decided to play this game? Who invented this game? Trying to figure out that information to identify the situation, to see and try to identify, okay, who is the perpetrator in the situation, who is the victim in the situation, or is this something where we are walking in like a lighthearted moment, but then being able to talk to the kids and understand boundaries and understanding those type of things. And then moving forward, and if there is concerns of child sexual abuse going on, then reporting that, even if it is between two children. It's very important, again, that we have to report those things to higher powers that be, so that we try to make sure that this doesn't happen again, and hopefully that child who is perpetrating can get that intervention and start engaging in therapy and understanding those things, so this does not become a lifelong issue. Okay, so we're going to start getting into the grooming process. So understanding the grooming process is very important, because I think oftentimes when it comes to abuse in general, there can be a lot of blame and misunderstanding. Like, how could this happen? Why didn't you tell anyone? But people who are perpetrating go through, again, extreme lengths to perpetrate their victims. So the grooming process can be slow, subtle progressions of acts, which can either be physical, emotional, or psychological, to gain trust and access to kids. Perpetration is not a linear process, but on a continuum. So there might be kind of this testing that might be going on, or kind of, seeing, what the family or the community is all about, and seeing who they can have access to. So the first thing that a perpetrator will do is identify a potential target. So this could be children, families, or communities to exploit. So who is available, vulnerable, and desirable? I went through a training, which again, I am not good with names. I always share this, but I want to say her name is Corey Jenwell Jensen. I will look into that again, but she has been working with perpetrators for over 30 years, has done a lot of research, or the stats I have included is research that she has done. And she, back in the day, part of programs, or at least her program, I think she was either out in Minnesota or Montana or somewhere out in the Midwest, where perpetrators had to go through programs, and they had to be, courts mandated them to be part of research. So she would record interviews with sex offenders. And there was a sex offender who saw a child out in public, was attracted to this child, and found out that their mother was a single mom. So in order to gain access to that child, he then aligned himself with that mother. In fact, he married her. He formed a relationship with the mother in order to gain access to that child, and then gain access to her, abuse her, and then also use that child's friends to abuse them as well. So again, availability, vulnerability, and desirability. So the offender might gain information about the needs and vulnerabilities of that child or that family. And this can be through communication or interaction, or just simply observing others. So this could be, say, how the Catholic Church, how a lot of the priests would intervene, is a lot of their victims were from single parent homes, where they would see maybe struggling. Okay, let me take you under my wing and bring you into the church and make you an altar boy or whatever, or let me help you with food or teaching you the ways of morals or whatever they're spewing, to then gain access to that child, and let me be a father figure. Or it could be something where a coach notices that a parent isn't always on time to pick up their kid from practice or from school or whatever it may be, and be like, oh, well, your house is on my way, so I can drive little Tamara or Billy home, and it's none the wiser because it's like, okay, we trust this coach, and therefore this is a need. And those needs can be practical things like that, or it could be emotional needs. There could be monetary needs, many different needs. So they're going to understand what that family and what that child is looking for and vulnerabilities. Third step would be establishing a connection to the child and the caretakers. Again, we're trying to wave a veil over the caretakers in the community at large. I'm a trusting person, when in fact I am not. So they're going to try to play a role in the child's life. They're going to access them via relationships, activities, and organizations, and they're going to alienate or integrate the caretakers. So this is allowing them to gain trust, access, and use manipulation of power or position, trust, and authority to have that connection to that child and to that family. Another example of someone who was in the trainings of the offenders was that there was someone who was an offender who had been offending, since he was a child, but he didn't distinguish himself as a true offender until the age of 18, because he decided that, I'm 18, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to go to college to become a teacher so that I can gain access to children and form those relationships with them. And he would go to, once he went through college and then was looking for jobs, he would be interviewing, as he was getting interviewed, he was interviewing the school in terms of security. What do they talk about to the kids? Is this a topic of child sexual? This is something that they talk about, and being like, oh, this is something we really need to protect our kids about. So again, showing that they're a trusting person, putting themselves in a position of power and authority. So really thinking that through. Not everyone has that same thought process, but if someone is a consistent perpetrator, they are thinking about these things. Okay, so on the continuation of the grooming process, that perpetrator is going to start to fulfill the needs and vulnerabilities of the family and that child. So this is the core grooming behaviors, influenced by the offender's skill and the child's reaction. So this could supply, again, emotional or tangential monetary things. So, okay, this child isn't feeling loved or feel like they're getting enough attention or recognition or affection or whatever that might be. So, okay, I'm going to play that role in your life. Or, oh, you want alcohol for the party. I'm the cool person in your life. I'm going to go get that alcohol for you. Oh, you want to stay out an extra hour later at night? Sure, let's do that. Let's talk to mom or dad and figure out how we can do that, so that I'm the cool person. I'm having the relaxed rules, or whatever that might be. Or they might allow the forbidden, like, ooh, we're not allowed to have ice cream or sugar in the home, so let's go out and let's just go get some ice cream. So something that's on the lower scale of forbiddenness, breaking or going to a bar or something, anything that child wants. They're going to try to figure out, okay, how can I get this for the child? How can I break down rules and boundaries that exist between the child and the adult, as in the perpetrator, and be like that cool person who's supportive or whatever in their life. Or again, and they might also use intimidation on that child as well, or intimacy as well. And maybe, it's like, oh, but I love you, and this is what people who love each other do. Like, don't you love me type of situation. And then they're going to start to lower inhibitions, gradual intrusions of boundaries and escalation of behaviors and abuse and testing. So again, so for example, like my old coworker, where there's the troop leader who just casually or mistakenly leaves pornographic magazines. Oh, so sorry. Oh, did you like what you saw? Like, it was like, let's talk about that. Or, if you have any questions about those things, you can always come to me. We could talk about that. But not in that like adult, let's have the sex talk, but this is more intrusive talk. So understanding those boundaries. And then that could also lead to like, okay, well, I'm going to just put my hand on your thigh. Okay. And, or then I'm going to move to other places of the body and see how that goes, where it might go from a hug. And that's uncomfortable for the child because of positioning, and then perhaps the perpetrator, maybe the child is sitting on the perpetrator's lap in front of family members. Meanwhile, they are touching them inappropriately, but it doesn't seem like anything's happening, and the child is sitting there, not reacting or anything like that. And that could be for many different reasons. It could be because they're already groomed, they don't understand that this is an intrusion of their boundaries, or they're like, okay, well, this is happening in front of my family and no one's saying anything, so I guess this is okay. Or they just might be frozen and unable to speak. So many different reasons. But essentially, all of these escalations and testing can cause desensitization to increase the violations. And then the person who's perpetrating is going to preserve that process. So they're going to prevent disclosures. They're going to repeat victimization. They're going to encourage victim compliancy and collaboration. Also, they're going to prepare for a disclosure. Often we will think about how the offenders will often think about how they will respond to a child making disclosure and practice how they will handle this. And then offenders will take each offense as a learning experience so that they can get better at perpetrating. Another example, there was someone who was a pastor and had been perpetrating since he was a child or teen. He was a youth pastor. They were working with kids, underserved populations, and he perpetrated hundreds of kids, and he was actually caught by, I think, 2 times at least, because 2 of the kids made disclosures. And the pastor's like, oh my God, I can't believe these kids would say this about me, like, and then undermine that kid because of maybe problematic behavior in the past that they had, like, oh, maybe like one of his victims had been in juvie, and it's like, oh, well, they're, this, or they have mental problems, whatever it might be, to diminish the victim's disclosure. And in fact, many people believe this pastor, and in fact, a lot of people in that parish were like, I can't believe they're doing this, but it makes sense because whatever, they're troubled kids and blah blah blah. And it wasn't until like the 3rd disclosure that someone actually did something, and then the pastor was actually arrested and went to prison. So again, when a disclosure is made or something's happened, we have to believe the children. We have to call out people for inappropriate behaviors and things that we're noticing, because if we don't, then it's going to continue. Also want to point out, I don't know if I actually go into this further, but encouraging victim compliance and collaboration. So again, that child might feel guilt and shame because they're like, okay, the offender might be like, okay, well, tell your brother and sisters to go outside and play. Go lock that door, go get the lube off the table. So it makes it feel like I had something, the victim feels like I had something to do this. I asked for this because I was following direction, when in fact that is not the case at all. Yeah, it's just an abuse tactic. So understanding things an abuser might say to a child before, during, and after abuse. They might threaten to hurt the child. They may hurt the parent or threaten that. They might say like, it's not a big deal. Everyone knows, especially if the perpetrator might be doing minor perpetrations in front of other people. So the kid might be thinking, well, yeah, they were doing this, so I guess everyone does know, and I guess it's not a big deal. Your parents will be mad at you. You'll get in trouble. No one will believe you. Your parents said this was okay. This is a game. This is our secret. This is what big kids do. Don't be a baby. Like, how many times I don't know if anyone else has had this. Kids do not want to be considered to be babies, even if they're only like 4 or 5 years old. Like, I'm not a baby, I'm a big boy or girl, or you might be like, oh, don't you want to be a good boy or good girl, or a big boy, big girl, whatever that might be. So they're kind of getting that message like, yeah, I don't want to be a baby, I'm a big boy, I'm a big girl. And not wanting to be treated as a little kid, because oftentimes many kids, they just want to grow up and be older than they actually are. But let's try to slow that down. Children, being an adult isn't that fun. You got to pay bills and a lot of other responsibilities. So let's try to just be kids. Sharing that message. Oftentimes, a perpetrator might be like, this will make me happy. And that child might feel guilt. It's like, oh, well, I got you all these things. I show you love and affection and all these other things. And like, when people love each other, we try to make each other happy. Like, don't I make you happy? Okay, if I make you happy, then you could do this thing for me to make me happy. So putting that guilt. Again, this is what people do that love each other. Don't you want to be a good boy or girl? Again, something huge. I tell a lot of people, I'm that person at baby showers or with my friends where we're trying to have conversations with our kids where maybe we pick them up from a party. Instead of being like, okay, were you good? Were you a good boy or girl? Did you listen? Yeah, I listened. Yeah, I was good. When in fact we should be having conversations. Okay, what did you like about the party? What did you not? Did something, what was your favorite part? Did something happen that made you feel uncomfortable? Giving these opportunities, even if nothing did happen, we have no suspicion of something happening, but opening those dialogues and elevating our conversations with our kids to assess kind of what's going on. And that, I think, just helps too in building further relations. It's not as if we have to be investigators and being like, who's touching you? It's just having that greater dialogue and building that better connection with our children. So those important things to note. Now, what perpetrators say to adults if disclosure is made. I told them she was mad at me. And also to note, these are all actual quotes from offenders that are underneath if a disclosure is made. So offender said, I told them she was mad at me because I punished her. So be like, oh, that teen or whoever, oh, of course they're mad because they got their phone taken away or whatever. So, oh yeah, that makes sense. No. I said she wanted to go live with her mother, so she accused me of this to get out of the house and my rules. It's a huge one. She said I did this because I wouldn't let her date. I can't believe you believe that I'm that kind of person. Who do you think, who would do something like that? I was never alone with them. This one is huge. Again, through investigations, that's a huge one. It's like a grandparent or someone else who's like, well, I've never been alone with them. Never? You've never been alone with that child, even for 5 minutes, a minute. Perpetration doesn't take that long to do. You don't need hours of time. There's plenty of times where someone walks out of the room, walks right back in, and something happened. So understanding that. I told them that I felt terrible about it and would be willing to go to therapy. So again, kind of pushing it under the rug, not reporting it to others because, oh, I'm going to take responsibility. I feel so bad about what I did. I have a problem. I think it's also for people important to note, what is that? Kidnapped in plain sight. I believe that was where, again, the offender was offending the entire family, grooming the entire family. And he in fact told the family, oh, I have this problem. And my therapist told me that I have to test myself. So I have to sleep in the same bed as your child to see if I'm going to perpetrate them or not. And the family's like, yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll help you out. Of course, this is like 70s, 80s, or whenever it happened. Again, details, themes, I get it. Details, not so much. So that is something that happened back in the day, quote unquote, but that's something could easily happen today as well. I said her friend made something like this up and got a lot of attention, so she did it, which that happens a lot of times and sometimes in kids that I've interviewed where they're like, oh, well, so-and-so said something and, you know, that's why I said it. And then through further discussion, you find out, okay, that's not actually the reason why you said that. Sometimes it could be, but not so much. I told them it was the child's fault. I've heard this a million times. Oh, well, they were, you know, rolling around and we were in the hot tub or we were wrestling and I just couldn't help myself. And no, that's not, or the child was climbing all over me. No, that's the kid. I told them it would ruin my life if they reported me. This one hits home so much for me because so often I hear that from parents where they're just like, well, this, you know, this was a very important person in our community. This is a, you know, a figure or an important person in our life. And it's like, are you sure? Are you really sure that this is something that happened? Are you just making this up? These are things that, you know, other people might be saying to that child. And then the child's like, has to rethink, oh, okay, this horrible thing happened to me. Am I gonna, and now I have to decide if I'm making this up, because if I actually go through with this and report this abuse, then that's going to ruin their life, the perpetrator's life, not my life. But so getting priorities straight. I told people that her mother coached her to get back at me. Again, when it comes to like divorce and things like that, that can be a big factor. Also, an understanding rates of false allegation during custody disputes is 12%. False allegations were more frequently made by non-custodial parents, usually a father, 15%, than custodial parents or a mother, so that's 2%. So understanding who has custody, who does not. It's not always the case, but no, just understanding those false allegation rates. So getting into disclosure, this is very important to understand. So only about 1/3 of child sexual, I can't speak. Only about 1/3 of child sexual assault survivors disclose their assaults during childhood. 1/3. Very small amount. So the fact that when a child says something, even if, you know, young kid says something, doesn't necessarily make sense, but if they're saying something that seems or sounds like abuse, or they're right out telling you, that's huge, because the likelihood of them saying something when something's actively happening is so infrequent. So that's why we really need to believe our kids and really looking into things to help support them and try to make sure it doesn't happen again to the best of our ability. Okay, so why children don't tell. They may feel that sexual violence, particularly when it occurs within a familial context, is seen as a private issue and not to be discussed with non-family members. So, you know, that could be something huge. It's, you know, we talk about things in the family, we deal with things as a family. You know, you don't talk about the family outside the house, whatever that may be. And there might be many factors that are involved with that. Children don't want to get the perpetrator in trouble or destroy the family, because that's either what the perpetrator is saying will happen, or that's just how they feel will happen, because maybe of things that they're learning from the world, where it's like, okay, well, this is someone who I do view, because I'm being groomed, is someone that I do care about, I do love. It's just that I love this person. I just don't love, you know, being abused. And if the abuse stopped, then we would be okay. I want the abuse to stop, but I don't want that person to leave. Same, very similar to domestic violence too. It's like, I love this person, I just want the abuse to stop. So they don't want to destroy the family. They want to be blamed. They think they will not be believed. And understanding, again, false allegations in child sexual assault cases are only 2 to 12%. So, you know, a high percentage of children, when they're making those disclosures, are telling the truth. Younger children, the false allegation may be 2 to 6%. Into teens might be 9 to 12%. So understanding those statistics and understanding that false allegations with any crime is between 2 to 10%. So that's just not about, you know, that's across all false allegations of any crime. They think they will be blamed for the assault because, again, they might feel that guilt and shame, like they had something to do with it. They do not have words because they're too young, or maybe when they're talking about it now, maybe it happened when they were younger. They don't know it was wrong. Again, going back to like, oh, this is a game, that is often something, or bath time can be a time of perpetration, because it's like, okay, we're just cleaning, we're doing all those things. And again, that child might not know what's happening is wrong because, oh, we're just playing a game. That's, you know, this is just what we do. Like, you know, it's the funny tickle game or whatever it may be. So if that's something that a disclosure in as an interview, where I might ask, okay, tell me more about this game. Or if you walk in on something, okay, tell me more about this game. Things like that. Children may then explicitly threatened by their perpetrator with consequences if they talk about what had happened to them. So again, like, gonna hurt your cat, I'm gonna kill your parents, I'm gonna do, you know, whatever it may be. Again, the child may feel shame, blame, self-blame and shame over their own behavior before and during abuse, because they quote unquote went along without protesting as increasingly intimate and inappropriate behaviors were introduced. Again, because they were being desensitized. There could be a million other reasons as to why they quote unquote went along with it. Over time, ceased feelings of being complicit with their feeling. They feel they were like complicit in their own abuse. Failure to stop, failure to report, and are attempting to hide the abuse from others, because again, there's shame and they're being taught like, oh, this has to be your secret or whatever it is, or they feel responsible, like, oh, I didn't stop it then, so, you know, why, I'm just not going to say anything, or feeling like helpless in the situation. Side benefits from the abuse. The child has tried to tell someone previously, but the abuse was ignored or minimized. That's also very important to note. But going along with the side benefits of abuse, okay, well, you know, yeah, I have to do this crappy thing once a week or whenever it is happening, but now I get to go have a cell phone, or I get to have more privileges, or whatever it is. Again, that abuser is finding manipulation in those wants and needs. And again, going to the child has tried to tell someone, but, you know, maybe they didn't tell the right person, or they weren't believed. That's something that I've heard many times from even adults, where they did tell someone and nothing happened, because again, we're going to keep this as a family secret, or this is a family problem, we're going to deal with it, whatever it may be. So another stat important to do or to know is between 5 to 16% of children who are being sexually abused disclose. Between 10 to 12% of disclosures were reported to authorities. So that's not that many. So we really, especially if you're a mandate reporter, really, if something, even if you don't have full, like again, you don't have to have a full disclosure, if there is even suspicion of something, you can report that. So why children tell? Just want to take a moment to show the difference between why not telling and why to tell, in terms of just the amount of information I have, and the why children do not tell, and the amount of information why children tell. I think that speaks volumes to the reasoning as to why a disclosure isn't made versus a disclosure is made, and just seeing that. So why children tell, they have a concern for other children. Maybe they have siblings that are the age when their own abuse started, so now they're worried that the abuse is going to start to them too, when in all likelihood that abuse has already started, unfortunately. Or again, they just, they're like, okay, if this happened to me, I'm scared for my friends, I'm scared for my community, whatever it might be. Social supports from adolescent peer influence is a strong indicator. Maybe if they're in like later elementary or middle school or high school and they tell a friend or someone like, hey, this is what happened to me, and that friend is like, okay, we got to tell someone about this. Like, I'm going to be here. I believe you. I support you. So having the social support. Prevention programs that promote positive attitudes towards disclosure and an anonymous report format encourages more children to disclose. So if we're doing prevention programs in schools, having that opportunity that, it'd be like, okay, if something happened or about something, you can go to a teacher or come to me, whoever the presenter is, something like that. And I've seen that in other people that I've talked to who did prevention programs, the amount of disclosures that they got after their presentation, especially if someone didn't understand that they were being abused and they were like, oh my God, this has been happening to me, or this has been happening to my friend, I need to talk to someone. And a supportive caregiver. So they have someone that they feel like they can turn to and go to. That doesn't have to be a parent. That could be a teacher, coach. It could be every single person who could be a perpetrator. All those like distinguishing factors of trust and authority. Those could also be like who you actually think are supportive caregivers. So then that person tells that caregiver, about what's been happening. So how children tell. They could tell you directly, like, hey, this is what's happening, X, Y, and Z, boom, bang, easy peasy. It's always great to have that. Indirectly. So maybe you're observing physical or behavioral indicators of something, that there's been a shift or something's going on. The kid or adolescent might leave something around to be discovered, artwork or writing. That is something I've heard a lot about too, where, someone submits something for an English class and it's like, okay, well, there's some underlying messages here. Like, what does this mean? They may say something like, Daddy didn't let me get any sleep last night, or my neighbor wears funny underwear. Well, why do you know your neighbor wears funny underwear? And I don't know about anyone, again, I don't have children, but I am going to say every parent wants their child to sleep, and you're going to go through all lengths to try to get that child to sleep. So saying, things or weird things that you're just like, that make you go, huh? Talking about a game they play or something that happened at bath time, again, hugely important. An accident that happened, so they accidentally touched me. Oh, it's a misunderstanding, whatever that might be. Showing concerns about a friend. So asking, like, what would happen if something bad happened to, kind of getting that hypothetical, being like, okay, is this really about a friend or is it about you? Kind of like treading that water. Okay. And as we're talking about all these things, all of the warning signs that we can try to look for to see if someone is experiencing child sexual abuse or being abused. But it's also important to note that indicators is change in behaviors from what is normal to the child. And often there are no physical signs of sexual abuse. So oftentimes there might be after an abuse, and if the child is going through an investigation process and the family's going through the investigation process, the multidisciplinary team that's involved with that might encourage for a physical examination. But as the slide says, only 4% of child sexual abuse victims have abnormal physical exams. So understanding that if a child does disclose that they've been abused, and they're like, yes, this happened yesterday, like getting an exam done is very important at that time. But even then, even if it's been 24 hours, there could be no signs of physical abnormalities. So just as, say, if you bite the inside of your mouth and you have, the injury inside your mouth, that portion of our mouth can heal very quickly just because of cells or whatever regeneration. I'm not a doctor, just know this from trainings. for medical providers that, that can heal very quickly, and so can the different genitalia areas of our body. Similar makeup and tissue and whatnot. Also, it could be something where, again, when we think of sexual abuse or think of rape, or some people think of it, we think of there's like a lot of force, it's very violent and all that stuff, when in fact that is not always the case. So understanding that as well. So physical signs can be the child might have difficulty walking or sitting. They might have torn, bloody, or stained underclothes that is inconsistent with, someone maybe who's potty training or whatever. They might have bleeding, bruising, or swelling in the genitalia area, pain, itching, or burning in the genitalia area, frequent urinary or yeast infections, STDs, STIs, whatever we call them these days. So that is a huge indicator, STDs and STIs. If a child has that, it's like, okay, well, that's a clear indicator. How did that happen? I've heard many stories from investigations. So, well, they used my towel, or they did whatever. And it's like, no. Also understanding fun facts about a lot of different STDs or STIs. A lot of the times, once that excretion is dry, the virus dies as well. I'm not sure if that's for all STDs or STIs, but for a lot of them, I think specifically at least like herpes. I think, again, not a medical doctor, but from what I hear from a medical doctor regarding these type of trainings. Also understanding the differences, just because the child does have a yeast infection or urinary infection or something like that is going on, like, okay, it doesn't necessarily mean automatically, oh, this child's getting sexually abused. But, if that's something that is inconsistent, or maybe the child is being potty trained, and that could happen because they're learning how to wipe themselves, or learning, whatever else they're learning with all of that. But like being insightful to like, okay, what else is going on here? Trying to look for other indicators as well. So there could be behavioral, emotional, and psychological changes and warning signs. So maybe that child is shrinking away or seems threatened by physical contact. But on the opposite side of that, I've also seen kids who have no boundaries at all because they don't feel like, because of the abuse that they're experiencing, their body's not their own. That's what they're being taught through sexual abuse, that their body's not their own, boundaries aren't important. So that kid might be all over someone, a stranger or something like that. So that could be the opposite. They might exhibit signs of depression or PTSD, express suicidal thoughts, especially in adolescence, self-harm, develop phobias. So maybe, again, if we're thinking about bath time, a lot of kids don't want bath time, but it's like, okay, if like one day you're fine and now you're not, like what's going on with that? Or you don't want to go over to Aunt Sally's house anymore, like what's going on with that? Has trouble in school, such as absences or drops in grades, changes in hygiene, such as refusing to bath or excessively bathing, because either they're trying to appear to be disgusting physically and trying to repulse their perpetrator, or they're just like feeling so dirty that they're constantly bathing. Returns to regressive behavior. So that child might be trying to go back to a time before the abuse was happening. So that's kind of a reasoning for regressive behavior. So maybe it's an older child, maybe they go back to thumb sucking or bedwetting. Bedwetting is a huge indicator, a huge red flag of child sexual abuse, especially if that is something that, like, again, they're not being potty trained and all that other stuff. Big shift. It's like, okay, what's going on here? Runs away from home or school because they're not safe there. Overly protective and concerned for siblings, or assume caretaker roles because they're trying to protect that child or their sibling from being abused themselves. Nightmares, inappropriate sexual knowledge or behavior. It's like, okay, well, some stuff. Why do you know that? How do you know that? That's, and especially if it's like very nonchalant, like, let's investigate that. Let's look at that. Talk. Where did you learn that? Factors that impact trauma from child sexual abuse. So there's a lot of different factors if that child is gonna be impacted, or to the amount that they're going to be impacted. So the child's age and development status, so maybe they're a younger kid, again, it's being framed as a game, they don't understand. That's always, like it can be, even though this horrible thing happens, kind of a protective factor because they didn't understand what was happening was wrong, versus someone who's older and understands, okay, this is not appropriate, this is uncomfortable, like this is making me feel shameful. The relationship between the abuser and the child, if that abuser is someone who is a caregiver or an important, technically important person in their life versus like a stranger, because everyone promotes, not everybody nowadays, we're getting better about stranger danger, because more likely the child is being abused or people are being abused by people they know. You could still be abused by a stranger. So if it is a stranger, it's like, okay, whatever this person versus someone who could be a parent or a grandparent or something like that. And being like, okay, and having that message, if people love you, your family is supposed to be your support system, your security system, but then this horrible thing is happening to you, that's going to cause a lot of issues. Degree of force, violence, or threats used by the offender. If it's more forceful, more violent, more of those type of factors of fear of death or being harmed, that can cause more trauma. Degree of shame or guilt child feels about their participation. If they're, again, a younger kid doesn't really know that it's shameful, doesn't really understand what was happening to them, they might not feel that way versus an older child. The duration of the sexual involvement. Okay, is this a one-time thing, a more than one-time thing? Is this happening weekly, daily, all of those kind of things? Did it happen for a year, or did it happen throughout, like from forever? Motivation for disclosure. Again, if a child is found out or makes an quote unquote accidental disclosure, that might have more of an impact because they weren't necessarily ready to disclose, versus a child who's ready to disclose and being like, this is what's happening, or I'm scared that this is going to happen to my siblings. And also the way that the child's way of coping with the trauma, like are they resilient? Do they have support systems? Do they have coping skills? Like how are they responding to it? Have they already been in therapy, so maybe they have some of that background? Or are they getting into more maladaptive coping? And hugely, why it's bolded, when I bold something, it's important to me, and I think it's important for other people to know. Reactions of others following the disclosure is one of the biggest factors of impact of trauma from child sexual abuse. If that child does not have supportive people in their lives, if they are not believed, if they're getting constantly questioned and diminished and not being believed, that is hugely going to impact that child more than I've heard that from other people, that they had more trauma from the reactions of people not believing them versus the actual abuse that they went to. That's always the case for everybody, but that is huge. So when a child is telling you that this is happening, that's why we need to believe them and support them, because and there's people, I've heard this from parents and other people, how kids lie. Kids lie about taking a cookie from the cookie jar. Kids do not lie about being sexually abused. If that's factual or not, that is my belief, and I think it's something we need to focus in on. Okay, so we're just going to get into like a brief moment of human trafficking or domestic minor sex trafficking. I forget if someone else is doing a training or has already done a training on this, but I think it's important to just note when we're talking about child sexual abuse, because anyone under the age of 18, or I guess the age of consent, considered, they're not a prostitute, they are being trafficked. They are a victim of minor sex trafficking. No minor can be involved in sex acts, erotic dancing, or pornography, anything like that. And if that's being exchanged for value of money, food, shelter, protection being given to the minor or a third party for that minor to do that. not cool. Not, yeah, it's trafficking. Understanding the average age of entry into the life, quote unquote, is between 12 to 14. It's important to note just from age range. And at least 100,000 children are victimized to domestic violence, sex trafficking each year. But these are more stats that are related to 2011, so maybe that is higher now. And understanding that there's more slavery today than there was when slavery was legal, and that could be part of human trafficking. So domestic minor sex trafficking, the youth and the trafficker, so at-risk youth, it could be anyone, any youth is at risk of being trafficked. Youth with problems at their home, low self-esteem, youth lack a safety net, so maybe they don't have those supportive caregivers. Involved in the foster care system is a huge one. And if they also have a history of abuse is a huge risk factor. So 70 to 90% of sexually exploited children have a history of child sexual abuse because maybe they're being abused beforehand, and then it's like, okay, well, let's go on this venture of, you know, letting other people abuse this child because they're just used to it anyways. Runaway youth, because maybe they're exchanging things for food or shelter or things like that. LGBTQ plus community is at higher risk. Gang involvement and immigrant status. Maybe that's because they have to pay, they're trying to pay someone off for, if someone is undocumented, maybe they have to pay someone off to continue to stay here, or to, if they were brought in by a coyote, maybe that's something. So someone who illegally brings people to a different country, you know, maybe they're like, okay, well, this was your fee, but now you're here, so now whatever, you have to work off this, or making, you know, children work for a business or take care of being a nanny or something like that. So who are the traffickers? Traffickers can be anybody. It could be family members, friends, dating partners, peers, friends. So for example, say a teen is like, oh, we gotta go to the party and we need to get beer or drugs. I'm going to make my significant other, my partner, engage in sexual acts with this other person in order to obtain those beer or drugs for the said party. But it's not a big deal. It's just like a one-time thing. That's still trafficking because you're exchanging sex for goods, and possibly involving a third party. What are tactics? Traffickers use similar tactics as domestic violence abusers. So they're going to manipulate, isolate, intimidate, and use force, fraud, or coercion when it comes to trafficking, but also very similar to the tactics of grooming. Maybe they're going to be someone who's like that older cool friend, or that older boyfriend or girlfriend, all of those type of factors, or just, you know, being a family member and being like, oh, you have to do this because we gotta pay the bills. How traffickers find their victims? Anywhere. But most importantly, social networks, social media. This is huge when it comes to traffickers, when it comes to trying to find people to manipulate children into, again, finding those things that child needs or wants or desires, to then befriend them, to gain interest in them, all of those grooming tactics. You know, when it comes to social media, we don't gotta be standing around. We don't gotta go to a mall. We can stay home in our PJs. It's COVID time. Where are all the kids at? They're on social media. Everyone's on social media. Not everybody, but like a lot of people. So I always like to do an activity where if you do have social media, if you want to amuse me for a moment, or if you feel like doing it, if you have Instagram, for example, I don't know how TikTok works. Snapchat's also a huge place where people get perpetrated or get, you know, they might be like, oh, well,
send me a picture, I'll send you a picture. Now I'm going to use this picture and you have to send me more pictures, or I'm going to tell everyone about this or post this to other places, whatever that may be. But if you go to, say, Instagram, you go to the little search thing, you go to search, and maybe you type in, I want money. And hold on, I'm trying to type this into my own social media. I want money, I want to make money, all those type of things. And if you go to that, and you're going to see posts with those hashtags, make money, and you might see different people. So for example, right now on the top things that I searched, there's multiple girls, there's other posting, looks like Bill Gates is also in there, things of money, but I'm going to click on this one person who looks like she is under the age of 18. I could be wrong, who knows, but they might be putting things like, I want to make money, I want to do this. So traffickers are going to use hashtags like that, look who's posting about that, who, and then understand like, oh, you want to make money, well, I have a modeling agency, or I do social media, whatever it is, and try to get in contact with that person. You know, I even saw something where someone had like literally had just graduated high school and had posted like, I want money, or whatever the hashtag was, and was literally like, I'm looking for a sugar daddy. And it's like, okay, you know, technically sugar baby, sugar daddy, all that sugar baby thing, there is a lot of controversy with that. But if someone's underage and that's enticing, that they could get things for money, you know, that could lead to trafficking. So important to note those things. Traffickers also use Uber or Lyft or things like that to send their victims to the John or the buyer. So again, like, they don't even need to get out of their house. They don't need to bring anyone anywhere, and they can use Venmo. They can use so many other things to traffic, that there doesn't need to be this physical exchange of money, or even, you know, really being social distanced. All those things. So being mindful of that. Red flags of trafficking: sudden presence of an older friend or partner, new expensive clothes, jewelry, technology, because it's like, oh, we're gonna lavish you with things to get you really enticed. Tattoos of names or dollar signs, also in Connecticut, in Bridgeport, no, Waterbury, I think there was trafficking ring, and a big tattoo that people had was a barcode on the back of their neck, and depending on the code of the barcode, like the numbers on it, that then signal to people who that person, who that victim, quote unquote, belonged to, or who they were owned by in the sex trafficking ring. Possessing more than one phone, talking about like making a lot of money, which doesn't always happen. Seems anxious, or always checking their phone. Again, kids are always on their phone, teens are constantly on their phone, but it's like, okay, to what degree? You gotta be checking in on our kids. Seem tired, that they don't get a lot of sleep, poor physical health, doing things for their partner constantly even if they don't want to. It's a huge one, also for domestic violence and other abuse. So a lot of times kids too, to be undetected, they are going to school, they're going to their activities, they're seeming like they are living a normal life, and then at nighttime, on the weekends, that is when they're being trafficked. So understanding that is like hugely important too, because it's not just, obviously there are people who are literally chained up in basements or kidnapped and whatever else, that are never, like, you know, missing. But there are a lot of kids who are undetected because it seems like they're living a normal life. And also for poor health, physical health, there might be people who are actually investing in their quote unquote product or their victims. So they might be having them go to medical doctors frequently, which is why we need to have doctors and medical professionals trained in these type of things, so that they can note the signs of being like, okay, well, this kid came in last week with their aunt, quote unquote aunt, or the actual aunt, and we have to see now that the next week they're coming in with a different aunt or a family member or something like that. Like, what's going on here? So getting into safety planning and prevention, and this is overall when it comes to sexual abuse, not just human sex trafficking. So what can you do? What can we do as people of adults and prevention workers or in a community? Understanding where the real dangers are. So stranger danger versus tricky people. It can be an adult letting kids know that, there is stranger danger that can happen, but we also have to understand who are tricky people, who are trying to get over on us and trying to confuse us and make it seem like things are okay, and using this grooming processes. Again, letting the kid know, your child know, or people in the community know that it can be an adult or a child. It's not always an adult. A lot of perpetrators are children. It can be someone you know, even if it's a mommy, daddy, a friend, etc. Just, does something, you tell someone, giving that autonomy to that child. Like if, asking that child, like, oh, can mommy tickle you? Can mommy give you kisses? Can daddy give you kisses? Again, a lot of people growing up, it's like, okay, you have to hug your family member. You have to give your family members a kiss when you get there. For myself, like for family members and loved ones, for their kids, I always ask them if that's okay. Getting in that habit, like that child's body is their own. If they do not want to do something or hug someone, that's okay. It's not what a person looks like, it's what they say and what they do to make a child that makes them feel unsafe. So even, it doesn't have to be that, like, I don't know, like whatever past people were like the creepy person, it's what they're doing and what they're saying, that makes that kid uncomfortable, and listening to that child and being like, okay, this person made me uncomfortable because they like pat my head, or when they hugged me it felt weird, like taking that into consideration, really listening, like, okay, what was uncomfortable, like let's take that into consideration. So understanding tricky people, adults asking kids for help, and adults asking kids to keep secrets. So I like to, when I'm talking about confidentiality and mandate reporting with my clients, I like to do the distinction between good secrets and bad secrets. So like good secrets is like there's a surprise party. I've got to keep that a secret, but that we eventually, that secret gets to come out because it's like, okay, we have the party. Bad secrets is like if something bad's happening or someone's like, you cannot share this with anyone. Those are unsafe things, or even adults asking kids to do or have conversations about adult things, like those are tricky people. Again, good versus bad secrets. Sorry, explained that. And teaching children about the uh-oh feelings, like really listening to our bodies. I think as adults, we need to listen to our bodies more and understand that intuition. So feelings that let them know something isn't right, the stomach doing flip-flops, trust your gut instinct. If something just doesn't feel right and you don't know why, just listen to your intuition, listen to those gut feelings. Really gotta listen to our bodies. Body keeps score. So other safety planning and prevention, I'll just like put this all here. Okay. Again, teaching children about bodily autonomy. Children are the bosses of their bodies. My body is mine and your body is yours. Like even when it comes to mom and dads or doctors. I was recently watching Queer Eye on Netflix. It's a new season, highly recommend. And one of the people on the show is a doctor, and one of their interactions, she's telling this kid, hey, is it okay if I do a body exam? Like I can check out your body because I want to get your permission. And here's this kid who's probably in elementary school. I want a beautiful example of a doctor giving that, like, asking for that permission, asking for that consent to do a physical exam, and letting that child, further reinforcing that child, like your body is your own. I thought that was a beautiful moment. Teach children about safe touches and unsafe touches or confusing touches. So moving away from good touch, bad touch, because bad touches can sometimes feel good, which then makes children feel even more like this is my fault, like it felt good, I enjoyed it, like something's wrong with me, like I was involved. So safe touches versus unsafe touches or confusing touches. Who's allowed to touch your body, or even if the doctor being like, again, reinforcing like the body autonomy, like, is it okay if I do this? And if something feels uncomfortable, like, okay, let's talk about it. Defining private parts. It's important to teach children proper terminology and not nicknames. So using vagina, penis, all of those, there's a lot of uncomfortability when it comes to talking about it. Like if we can teach a kid what head, shoulders, knees, and toes are, we can also, there's nothing wrong with using the words penis and vagina, and how we're defining those body parts, because that's what it is. That's just what it is. It's not dirty. And also, for example, when doing an interview, I find out what the kid calls those different body parts, if that's something that we get to the point to, talking about those type of things. There was a case where someone was calling, they were taught that their genitalia was called their purse. So they were saying, or was going undetected, like, oh yeah, my daddy is putting his stuff in my purse. So we're thinking, okay, this little kid just has like a little toy purse and daddy's just putting whatever in her little toy purse. Not the case. So very important to teach kids the proper terminology for genitalia. Just makes things very clear. Especially, unfortunately, we get to investigations and getting into, if it actually does go to trial, it's, no, they called it this, so what, like, called it a cookie, so, whatever. Proper terminology. Teach children the clean, safe, and health rules. Not a firm rule. If a child feels unsafe, then it's an unsafe touch. That's that. Cleaning with a washcloth and not putting something inside them. So teaching them that, because again, bath time, like nothing's going inside you when cleaning, only on the outside. We're not using our hands to wash kids. We're using washcloths to wash kids. Very important. The body internally cleans itself, does its thing. Gives examples. If you go to the doctor for a sore throat, would it make sense for the doctor to look at your private parts? Absolutely not. So therefore, the doctor's going to check out your sore throat and not other parts of your body. So understanding those rules. And safety rules, if they get an unsafe touch, these again are very, I have a problem with them. So if the kid is able to say no in a strong voice, if they're able to get away, telling a trusted grown-up, it's never too late to tell. So again, grooming process, the likelihood of that child actually saying no or getting away or doing those things might not actually happen. If it's like someone they're unfamiliar with that they haven't been groomed by, then that might be something that makes more sense. Or if it's like another kid or something on the playground and like they do something uncomfortable, it's like, no, this is like not okay. So understanding the distinctions, and if understanding and teaching them, it's okay if you were not able to say no, if you were not able to get away, if you did not fight back, because our bodies either purposely put us in a state that we're unable to fight back, and understanding fight, flight, freeze, that sometimes our body and neurological, our brains just shut down, so we're not able to do those things. It's okay that happens. So, teaching that for even adults. So further, what can we do? Continually frame experiences around boundaries. Boundaries are so important. I have these conversations with kids all the time, even if it comes to like sexual behavior, emotional possessions, personal space, all those types of things. If anyone has seen the T YouTube thing, that is huge to understand. If like one person borrows you say, okay, someone can borrow my car one day. Does that mean that person can borrow my car every single day without permission or asking me again? No, it was a one-time thing. You always got to ask permission. If my friend gave me a pencil to borrow at school one day, can I just then go into their desk and go get a pencil or a pen? Absolutely not. Got to ask for permission. All of those things. So constantly framing experiences around boundaries and consent. This is where we're teaching the fundamentals, so we don't have to get the first time we're talking about boundaries and consent is when they're in high school or college. It's too late. We've got to start doing that younger and younger. Teach consent, integrate into your daily lives. Consent is agreeing to do something and giving permission for something to happen. You need to get consent before crossing any type of boundary. we teach children to ask permission before touching other children. Okay, here's your friend. You give them a hug all the time. Can I give you a hug? Yes, because some days people just don't want hugs, and that's okay. Sometimes, depending on your mood, maybe you're angry or you're upset, and you're like, I cannot be touched if I'm angry or upset because this will just escalate me. That's okay. Never forcing a young child to hug, touch, or kiss somebody else. Again, like, oh, go, we just spent all this time at so and so's house. Like, go give them a hug goodbye. It's like, no, no. If the kid wants to, that's fine, but we're not forcing that. Model consent to your child with your spouse and others. It's hugely important. Again, asking to for a hug or borrowing something. Other things we can do is further explanation of child sexual abuse and abusers. It's not a sickness. It's something like stealing and lying. Like, it's like not a good thing. This is not something like, that person does need help, but not minimizing or diminishing the fact that what they're doing is like just simply not okay. Telling or not telling, teaching children that abusers use tricks to keep kids from telling. So safety plan, how would they keep you from telling? Telling the child that you will never be mad at them and they will never be in trouble if something like this happens. Because again, abusers might use that tactic where they're like, oh, they're going to be like further reinforcing, if this ever happens, you won't be in trouble. I'm here for you. Make a list of other people they can tell. So again, they may not feel comfortable or be able to tell a parent or another person who's in a caregiving role because that person could be the abuser. So, okay, who can we tell? Who could tell our teacher? We can tell grandpa. We can tell Miss Smith from down the road because whatever my reasoning is, I trust that person. Children want to protect their parents. They have worries that their parents will be sad or mad and need backup people to tell. So often I have parents who are like, if they have that open communication, they feel like they talk to their kids about everything. They feel like their kids can come to them for anything, because they reinforce that. But kids want to protect their parents, and kids will not always tell their parents. And they will want to continue, even if they do make a disclosure, they may want to take that disclosure back because now they see that their parents are sad or upset or mad, and they feel so bad about it. And that parent needs to, like, helping that parent in therapy or as an advocate, helping them understand, like, a lot of kids don't tell their parents because they have their own embarrassment, or they don't want to hurt their parent because they love them. So sometimes parents are like, why didn't they tell me I'm such a bad parent? It's like, no, you're not a bad parent. It happens a lot. It happens to the best of us, even if you do have that open communication. Blending the sex abuse checkups with other safety talks. So we're talking about fire safety. We're talking about crossing the street. We're talking about, unfortunately, gun safety stuff in schools. All that shenanigans and things we unfortunately have to do. But talking about all of those safety factors, sex abuse should also be talked in those safety talks as well. And it doesn't have to be like, we got to sit you down and have these talks about these bad people. It's like, no, it's just casual conversations. And just as other safety talks, these safety talks about sexual abuse should be repeated 3 to 4 times a year. Again, especially with young kids, because that they're young. They're not going to remember. They'll be like, ooh, pretty butterfly. Let me run something sparkly. They have a lower attention span. And that's why we have to repeat exercises and things like that to really instill it. So further roles of adults in prevention ultimately is up to adults to prevent child sexual abuse. The burden of prevention should not be on children. It shouldn't be on the kids to be like, well, why didn't you tell? So many reasons. But it's up to us. We have to hold other adults accountable and hold perpetrators accountable, as we see a lot of people in terms of our legal system not always, being held accountable, and then they're released and perpetrating other people and getting better at perpetrating. So those systems need to change. Hopefully over time that can happen. So ways that we are going to hold other adults and perpetrators accountable: if a child tells an adult about an assault, no matter how minor or major, it should be reported and addressed. Even if you think, oh, the kid's like, oh, I think it was a misunderstanding, or, it wasn't a big deal. No, we have to address it. If you see something that is inappropriate between child and adult, address it right away. For example, if an adult is wrestling with a child and you notice someone's hands touching a butt or a genitalia, you go, hey, watch where your hands are going. Be mindful. And that could be something as simple as that, can then reframe the abuser's mind, be like, okay, well, clearly this person is seeing things and looking out for that child. So maybe I'm not going to perpetrate this child. Doesn't mean that person's not going to perpetrate other kids, but at least like we're just doing our best to hold other people accountable and keeping an eye on things. Even if you think it's a misunderstanding or worried that person will lose their job, would you rather let the professionals determine that or potentially allow the child to be abused further? So again, like, oh, we're going to deal with it as a family, or, you know, all those type of things. Now we have to share this information because silence is not going to help anyone. And, you know, let's rather like get the professionals, like a forensic interviewer, CPS, police, whatever it is, let them determine. Though, you know, again, that doesn't necessarily, just because they close a case, doesn't mean that abuse didn't actually happen. Maybe that child was not ready to fully disclose, or whatever else might happen. But like, we have to do something to try to prevent this from happening again and again. And that is all. That is all, folks, that I have for today. I appreciate everyone who was able to join me today. Again, this is a lot of information to take in, and can impact people differently. So if you are someone who is part of family services and maybe this is something that has been triggered you, know, reach out to a supervisor, or a colleague or a loved one, or another support system that you feel is important. Or if you're someone from the community, feel free to reach out to us as well, especially if this is something that you've experienced or are dealing with in some way. Please reach out.